I was 22 years old when this happened, and at that point in my life, I had just graduated from college, and I was caught in that strange limbo that follows when the world expects you to have it all figured out, but you are still trying to find your footing. And I was picking up whatever odd jobs I could around my small town, babysitting, cleaning houses, walking dogs, running errands for people. Anything that put cash in my hand, and a woman I had dogs sat for before recommended me to a friend of her neighbors, a man named Craig, who she said needed someone trustworthy to watch his dog for a week. And I thought nothing of it at the time because people asked me to pet sit often, and Craig called me that same afternoon and explained that he would be traveling, and he needed not just someone to feed and walk his golden retriever, Max, but someone who would actually stay at the house overnight because Max was an anxious dog and did not do well alone. And Craig said he would pay more than usual, and I agreed immediately because I needed the money. 2 days later, I met Craig in person, and he was in his late 40s, tall and lanky with wire rim glasses and a windbreaker zipped up to his chin, and there was nothing remarkable about him. At first glance, maybe a little overly friendly in the way he smiled too wide and talked a little too much, but not someone who set off alarm bells, and his house sat on the edge of town down a gravel driveway surrounded by woods, and the trees closed in tightly around it. So even in the daytime it felt shadowed, and the house itself was nice, but outdated with beige carpets and floral curtains and a faint smell of old wood and something sweet, like potpourri that had been sitting out too long. Craig walked me through everything and showed me where the spare key was hidden and which fridge items I could help myself to, and he told me I could stay in the guest bedroom on the first floor just off the living room, and he gave me a rundown of Mac's routine, and I started the job on a Monday, and the first 2 nights passed quietly. I took Max for long walks and watched television, curled up on the couch, and slept in the guest room, with Max nestled at the foot of the bed, his breathing soft and steady. And I remember thinking this job was going to be easy money. But on the third night, everything shifted. I was sitting cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed something small and strange across the room. On top of the dresser, next to a lamp, sat a digital alarm clock. And I remember thinking it did not match the room because it was sleek black plastic with a bright blue LED display, and everything else in the room was dated, and I could not stop staring at it. And maybe it was the way the lamplight reflected off its surface, or maybe something deeper in me whispered to look closer, and I leaned forward and squinted and saw it. A tiny pinhole just above the glowing numbers, perfectly round, perfectly black, pointed directly at the bed. My stomach dropped so hard it was like the air was sucked out of the room, and at first I told myself it was probably just a sensor, but the way it was aimed felt deliberate, like an unblinking eye. And I remembered all those horror stories I had read online about hidden cameras disguised as alarm clocks, and my hands trembled as I picked it up, and it was heavier than I expected. And when I held it close, I heard a faint buzzing sound inside, like a small fan, and I turned it around in my hands, staring right into that tiny dark hole, feeling like it was staring back into me. That was when Max lifted his head and started whining low and anxious, and at that exact moment, I heard a sound that made every hair on my body rise. A door closing somewhere in the house, not the front door, but deeper inside, and the house was supposed to be empty. Craig was not supposed to be back until Sunday, and it was only Wednesday night. I froze, clutching the clock, my heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. And then slow, deliberate footsteps came down the hallway carpet, each step soft but unmistakable, and I moved quickly and set the clock back down exactly where I found it and went to the door and locked it just as the footsteps reached the other side, and then Craig's voice called out, calm but slightly breathless, saying he had left something in there and needed me to open the door. I could not speak. I just stood there shaking, and he said it was not what I thought, and that the device was a motion sensor for the dog, and he had not wanted to scare me by mentioning it. And I backed away from the door, pressing my hand over my mouth, and he said to come out and talk like adults. And when I stayed silent, his knocking turned to pounding, and his calm voice twisted into anger, sharp and commanding, and Max barked and clawed at the door, and Craig's tone grew harsher. I looked at the window low enough to climb out and fumbled with the latch, my fingers shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get it open, and Craig yelled that if I did not open the door, he would get the key and call the cops and say I broke in, and I shoved the window up and climbed out awkwardly, dropping onto the damp grass, and Max tried to follow, but he gave up, and I ran down the gravel driveway with my heart pounding so hard it hurt, and I called my mom breathless and begged her to pick me up, and I hid behind a cluster of mailboxes until she arrived. I never went back and never got paid, and the woman who recommended me stopped replying, and a lawyer told me without proof it was my word against his, and for weeks I could not sleep without checking every clock and smoke detector in my apartment, and sometimes I still see that lens in my mind, the way it glinted under the lamplight, as if something behind it was watching, and I think about that door closing somewhere deep in that house, and I wonder if he was there the entire time, watching me through that camera. We booked the Airbnb in late September, a week before visiting my girlfriend Emma's. Sister and I picked it because it was cheap clothes, and the photos made it look cozy, like something out of a storybook. An old 2-story home with a wraparound porch, soft yellow lighting, hardwood floors, and a single line in the listing that I barely noticed saying the basement. Storage was off limits, and that seemed normal because hosts often locked away their belongings. And we arrived just before sunset. And I remember the way the trees loomed over the narrow road, and how the house looked older and more weathered than the photos. And it stood alone except for one distant house barely visible through the trees, and Alan the host, who was already waiting on the porch like he had been watching for us. And he was tall but slightly hunched, with gray hair, combed neatly, and a pressed flannel shirt and jeans, and his smile seemed stretched too tight, and his gaze lingered too long, and his voice was polite but firm as he showed us around. He led us through the hallway that smelled faintly of dust and something sweet like wax or old candles, and the living room had a big couch facing an ancient television, and the kitchen was clean but dated, and upstairs the single bedroom had a large bed under a ceiling fan and a dresser with a mirror. And then he stopped at the basement door near the kitchen and tapped the heavy padlock, and told us sharply not to go down there because that was his storage space. And he moved on without smiling, and left shortly after. That night, the silence was thick and heavy, and around midnight I heard a dull thud from below, but I told myself it was nothing. And the next day passed uneventfully until 2 in the morning, when dragging noises echoed from the basement like something heavy scraping the floor, and Emma heard it too. And the next night there were footsteps, soft and deliberate, and she whispered that she thought she heard breathing between the steps, and we lay frozen in silence, staring at the ceiling until morning. By the 3rd day, the house felt suffocating, and I checked the basement door in daylight and smelled something sour and damp. And that night came metallic clinking, followed by footsteps for nearly an hour, and Emma barely spoke, and her eyes darted toward the floor with every sound. And the 4th night she noticed the smoke detector looked strange, and I climbed up and unscrewed it and found a tiny camera with a green light glowing, and dread spread through me like ice. And I searched the room and found another lens near the mirror, and that was the breaking point. We packed frantically and left, and called police from a gas station, and they returned with us and gathered evidence. And when we showed them the basement door, we were stunned to see it wide open. And officers went down and voices echoed, and Alan was dragged from a closet where monitors displayed the live feeds from those cameras, and he was arrested, and Emma and I left that house shaken and hollow. And now we trust no rental homes. My name is Joe, and a week ago, I found a camera in my bedroom hidden by my roommate Eric, and when I first moved in, I thought he was quiet and awkward but harmless, and for months we barely saw each other because of opposite schedules. And then I noticed my closet open one night, and my chair turned slightly, and I brushed it off. But something felt wrong, and one Saturday I was cleaning, and I saw a small black dot near the ceiling, and it was a wireless camera aimed at my bed, and my hand shook as I pulled it down and I hid it in my drawer to test him. On the third night, I woke to him standing over me, rummaging through that drawer, and he froze and whispered that he knew I was awake, and he asked what I had done with it, and I sat up, heart pounding, and confronted him, and he claimed he thought I was stealing from him, and I called him a liar, and he stared at me blankly, and I threw the camera away, but when I checked in the morning, it was gone. And Eric still lives here. And sometimes I hear him standing outside my door at night, and I cannot sleep because I feel like I am being watched. And I want to leave, but I feel trapped. This is a world full of hidden eyes and silent watchers. And when you find the lens, it is always already too late.